Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this clip, but before you do, please hit subscribe. All right, the 80s roll around. Let's talk about the other 60% of shareholders, because there was some hostility that started brewing.
Yes.
Let's tell that story.
Okay. There was a company in Canada. It was a jewelry company that had, it was about, I'd say maybe 25% the size of Zales Jewelers. And the Canadian banks began making a lot of loans to Canadian companies to do investments in the United States. I don't know if you recall that, but it was pretty prevalent at the time. And this particular company was contacted by their bankers about doing something in America. And they borrowed about $30 million, and they started opening stores and buying stores in the United States. And we were well aware of that. And I looked at their stores and so forth. And they were just another competitor as far as I was concerned. They were really no major concern or threat. And so they had all this money that was borrowed. And after a couple of years, they figured that they weren't doing real well with the stores and that they would just sell their stores off and pay the banks. This is the story that was related to me. And so they sold their stores, and the banks told them, well, look, you need to keep your investment in the United States. And they talked about that, and they said, well, we'll buy stock in a public company over there. And they picked us. And as soon as they bought the stock, and we had some really smart investment bankers, and I recall that they called me and said there's some unusual activity in Zales stock, and we talked about that, and they came down to see us and so forth, and we figured out it was this company that was much smaller than us, and so we contacted them point blank. And asked them, they said, well, yes, their bankers had suggested that they buy stock in Zales Corporation and blah, 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 blah. And I wasn't real satisfied with that. I knew these people. And the guy that was my somewhat contemporary, he was probably 10 years younger than me, he was their president and CEO. And I thought he was a pretty arrogant guy, but I didn't have anything to do with him, so it didn't bother me one way or the other. And so we ultimately worked out a relationship with them because they owned a pretty good chunk of stock in the company. We worked out a relationship with them with what's called a standstill agreement, where they would agree not to buy any more stock in the company, because we felt it was in very weak financial hands, and that it would be detrimental to all their shareholders if all of a sudden they had to go blow off, $30-50 million worth of stock. So we entered into a standstill agreement with them that they would buy no more stock, and we would give them 3 seats on our board of directors. We had 15 people on our board. And so that worked out. And going to a boardroom was like having an elephant in the room. These guys were sitting over in a corner, and they were not disruptive necessarily, but it wasn't real comfortable having them there. And so after a year or so of that, well, they started talking to us about junk bonds. They had been doing business with this guy, Michael Milken, who was, I've forgotten the name of the firm he was with. But
he invented the junk bond.
Yeah, the guy and by the way, he's worth several $1 billion today. He went to prison.
Yep. Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he went to prison for insider trading or something like that. But at any rate, he did invent junk bonds. And that's what they wanted to give us was their junk bonds. Of course, we turned that down very easily. And then
Why did they want to give them to you?
Well, they wanted to give us junk bonds, buy the company with them.
Oh, I got you.
Okay. They said, well, yeah, we'll just buy the company from you and we'll give you junk bonds. Well, that's like, giving all. your birthright for a piece of paper.
For some turds, junk bonds.
Yeah, just junk bond, which is a promise to pay later if I can't.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't, well, you don't get your money. So anyway, that was very easy for us to turn down. Said, no, we're not interested in your junk bonds. And by the way, you promised that you're not going to buy any more stock. And so that was easy to turn down. And they made more than one offer of junk bonds. And then as time went on, well, they became partners with Swarovski. And this guy who was running Peoples had gone to Wharton School of Finance with a man who was then I think he was the CFO of Swarovski. And Swarovski was headquartered in Austria. But they had a lot of money. Swarovski, by the way, their big business is reflective glass. And so all these little reflective glass things you see all over the world, on the highways and so forth, and every place you look, I think they had like 80% of the world market of it. And so they're very, very strong company financially. And they put up $250 million to buy more stock in Zales Corporation. And so now they made us an offer of all cash. They went to the banks, and with this $250 million, we're able to get a line of credit that was close to $1 billion. And they came to us, and that was a game changer for sure. We had a cash offer, and I went to New York, spent probably 3 or 4 weeks trying to figure out whether or not it was the kind of offer that we should take. Should we compete with it and tell because they had offered our shareholders $50 a share, which is about $20 over what it was trading for. And I looked at it and finally determined 2 things. Number one, I didn't think that they could run the company, and that it would not be good for the company. But number 2, I didn't see how I could beat the offer for the shareholders. And once again, keeping all your shareholders in mind, and you just came to the conclusion that that was the best deal that the shareholders could get. And so we agreed to accept their cash offer, all cash. And that was in late November 1986. And I remember I didn't trust those people as far as you could throw a chimney by the smoke. And I did not leave Zales Corporation until every check cleared. And I remember sitting at my desk sending our one of our lawyers to the bank in New Jersey that the checks were drawn on. And that was December 1986. And she called me about 10 o'clock in the morning, and she said, Mr. Zale, there is collected funds in the account so that all the checks will clear. And I got up and I left the company and I never went back.
Take a deep breath on that one. What's it like to have a family business that you've watched, that you were at 7 years old cranking watches, and because you're a public company, you don't truly have as much control over it's not like a private company where you just say, you're not getting on our cap table. What's that like?
Well, it's challenging. I remember that long before I was president of Zales, my father was had a cousin, a guy by the name of Jake Feldman, who was a scrap metals dealer. And Jake was a hard-working guy, and he was a great trader in metals. And his company was not doing well, and he made my father chairman of the board. And my dad would go over there every Saturday, and they would work on stuff at commercial metals, which today is a multi-billion-dollar company that's very, very strong. very profitable. And he would go there every Saturday. And after about a couple of years, well, my dad and my uncle called a little meeting of the top family people, and I was invited to come to the meeting to sit in the corner. And I was about, I guess it was 1960, something like that. So I'd been with the company full time about 5 years, 6 years. And they said they thought that we should buy Commercial Metals. We should merge with them. And they went around the room, and my brother was living in New York, running our New York office, and my cousins, his uncles and so forth, were living in California. And my other uncle was doing stuff in wherever. And they went around the room, and they said, "What do you think about this?" And, everybody absolutely loved it. I had a cousin who was living in New Orleans. He thought that was a great idea, great diversification. And it came to me, and I said, "I think it stinks." I said, "I don't think that we have any business at all in the scrap metal business, because our shareholders didn't buy their stock in a scrap metal business. They bought and I said that the two businesses just don't mix." And that was my first time to really express myself on a major transaction, and the whole thing disappeared right down in there. There's no further discussion about it. And that was probably the first time also that my uncles and my father understood that they had stockholders that they really had to think about. And I guess they listened to me. And I was just a kid when this was going on, but we'd been public for 4 or 5 years, 3 years, whatever. And I just had a different perspective than probably the rest of my family. And I had that on several occasions, and where I didn't agree with them, and was always very upfront with and told them my reasons, and they listened. I was just kind of the reprobate, I guess. I was the guy who wasn't going to say, "Oh yeah, I think everything you guys are doing is great."
Okay, so when the I don't know if we're calling it a hostile takeover, maybe we can.
Yeah, it was.
But did the question is, you've been in this business, so this is your life, and some group from Austria that you probably know of but don't know, and some they start eating up the war. I imagine like they're just marching up the field, and at some point there's nothing really to do. They've made the right offer. As just a CEO and someone who loves the business, do you build up resentment? Do you just say this is part of the game and I'm just playing the game? And how do you feel about that?
You feel like crap.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't feel good about it at all. But by the same token, you have to be realistic.
Yep.
And you got to be prepared to move on. And it was a very difficult process for me because I happened to be the only person who had to sign a covenant not to compete.
Mm.
And so I was out of the jewelry industry for 5 years. I couldn't talk to anybody, couldn't make any investments, blah, blah, blah. So I was out. And that was really tough. And I had no respect at all for the guys who had bought it in terms of their ability to operate the company. And to the company's credit, they didn't take bankruptcy for 5 years. But under those guys, it was predictable. And when the interesting part about the bankruptcy, when they took bankruptcy, almost 5 years to the day, I went to one of the first creditor committee meetings, and I was thinking about putting together a group to buy the company back. And when I walked into the creditors committee with I think it was one of my relatives. I'm not sure who it was. And sat down at the table. They said, "We're not doing business with you." And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "You overcharged those guys. You made them buy that company and pay too much." I said, "Are you guys nuts?" So I put a gun to their head and tell them to buy. They said they didn't care. They wanted me out. And so, bingo, I was gone. I mean, it was just, and I never did understand that, and I still don't understand it. But I was very cognizant of the fact that they didn't know what they were doing, and they were going to ruin the company and they could go bankrupt.
Well, because a lot of corporate M&A, that's the most of these big corporate purchases don't work out. I mean, history shows very few mergers or acquisitions are really accretive and create a lot of value. What was it that you saw in them? Obviously, they gave you the right number. They had an amazing business in and of their own right, the shiny glass or whatever you call it. But what in the conversations with them did you know they're gonna torpedo the company? What made it obvious to you in talking to them?
Well, I just know that this guy from Canada, he thought to himself, if those West Texas yokels can run that business and make 30, 40, $50 million a year, and that guy went to Texas A&M and I went to Wharton, I got to be a hell of a lot smarter and better than they are, and I can run that business and make double the money they did. And the first thing they did was to eliminate our entire merchandising organization, which that's the death knell right there. Because, and then they said the policy we will have is that we will do strategic partnerships with our suppliers. Well, that didn't make any sense at all. And so they fired all of our creative people who were merchandising. They got rid of our vertical integration, saved a lot of money. And the guy who was chairman, I'll never forget, he called me and he said, "Come over and see me," and so forth. This was about 4 or 5 months after and he said, "We cut $70 million of expenses out of your company." I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You know that you had all those great locations in these malls all over the country. And we figured that with all the traffic in those malls and everybody else advertising, we didn't need to advertise. So we cut that advertising budget, $55 million. So, really?" He said, "Yes." He says, "And then we closed down that whole merchandising company that you had in New York." He said, "That was another $12 million. I said, "Really?" So that's $67 million. They picked up $3 million someplace else. But that just shows you how stupid they were. that they cut out all the advertising and they cut out the merchandising, which is the lifeblood of any retailing company. And it was just predictable to me. I mean, they just absolutely had no idea what the hell they were doing. But I got real lucky. Let me tell you what, because this is really important.
Okay.
After the first phone call I got when we announced that we were selling Zales Corporation was from the president of UT Southwestern Medical School. And he was a doctor. And he said, "I want you to come over here with me. I got an office for you." And I said, "Dr. Sprague?" I said, "That's really nice of you." And he said, "Call me Charlie." I said, "Yes, Dr. Sprague. I'll do that one day. But right now you're Dr. Sprague." And so I said, "I'll come see you." I said, "I got too much to do for right now, but I'll come see you when I get finished over here." And I got all involved with UT Southwestern. And it was an absolute blessing because here I was, 54 years old. The only thing I'd ever done in my whole life was the retail jewelry business primarily. And now I couldn't talk to anybody in the industry. I was out. And here they invited me over as a volunteer. I wasn't paid, but as a volunteer to get all involved and help them develop what is now their clinical activities. And I've always said that they did more for me than I ever did for them, because I would have gone ballistic just having nothing to do.
Yep.
I promised Barbara and the kids the very first day when I came home from after hearing that the checks would clear, I promised my wife and kids, I said, I'm not going to do anything for 1 year. I'm going to just look at deals and volunteer doing stuff. I'm not going to sign a lease. I'm not going to buy a business. I'm not going to take a job. None of that. I said, because I've seen too many of my friends who were in YPO with me and so forth that sold their businesses and thought they were wizards, and they went out and invested right away in something else and screwed up their finances and their family and got all screwed up. And I said, I'm going to wait and find something that fits. And having that year of doing something that was really worthwhile doing, I helped them build a hospital, reorganize their finances and their foundation and all that kind of stuff, and met all kinds of new doctors, was really very, very fortunate for me.